So it's 7:02 and we're going to call the May 6th, 2025 meeting of the Jericho Planning Commission to order. And I'm briefly going to go over the agenda items for tonight. We'll start with public comment. Then we'll approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was on April 29th. Then we'll go into a discussion of the future land use map and housing targets. We will then go to reports of the town planner and our liaisons. Then other business. Then we'll wrap up and plan for our next meeting, which is 2 weeks from tonight on May 20th. And then we will adjourn. Does anyone need to change any part of the agenda for tonight? Make any amendments? Okay. All right. So then, at this point, we'll move on to public comment. And this is a time that anyone can speak on any topic. Typically, we reserve this for items that on the agenda, but you can feel free to, like, if you do want to speak to the planning commission, we just ask that you come up to the chair that's under the mic, and then we would ask you to try to limit your comments to 3 minutes so that everyone has a chance to be heard. Is there anyone in the room who wants to speak to the planning commission during public comment?
Now would be your time.
Does it matter if I stand?
Nope. That's perfectly
Feel more
fine.
comfortable.
The camera will, yeah, the camera can find you. Yep.
Well, essentially, I came
And if
to,
you could just tell us who you are.
my name is Herbert Neal. I came to support some information that I read in the town report as for the committee, I believe they called it the Affordable Housing Committee, that had 10 recommendations or so, 10 or 12, that I felt were quite useful. It's a good step in the right direction. They had to do with things like increased number of residences on a private driveway, as well as reducing or eliminating minimum lot size. And I feel that that is a real good thing to do. And thing I would like is, why wouldn't it be fair to cover all areas of the town, not just the so-called town centers, because there's a lot of areas that would qualify for buildable parcels that are not necessarily available simply because of this arbitrary lot size of minimum. Some of them might be 3 acres. I happen to be one that's 10 acres. If I've had people that were interested in getting parcel, but I like it the way I had it, but I didn't want to exclude people, but I couldn't cut out big chunks and have it fit. They talk about various planning methods of planned unit development. Well, there's a lot of expense and going way beyond just somebody coming along and wants one spot. And that basically, I talked to a real estate agent. He said, if you had 100 acres, the first 7 would pay the expense of doing all the subdividing, and you might get some money back after the last 3 were sold. Well, that's defeats the whole point of selling anything. And I feel that in fairness to everybody, that minimum lot size shouldn't be a factor just because the real estate agents tell me that, their customers are looking for minimum lot size or, large parcels. That shouldn't be a factor. It should be something that is it a buildable area and limit it to that. Some parcels are just plain not suitable for, construction. And I just think that it should be expanded to include everything in the town, not just, targeted so-called town centers.
Okay, great. So I think we understand where your points are, and if there's anything that you are at your 3-minute limit, but if there's anything else that you want to add to that, if you think of other things, you could always write to Chris, the town planner, and share more of your thoughts and ideas with him in writing.
Okay,
So thank you for coming, and thanks for sharing your thoughts with us.
thank you.
Anyone online have public comment? I think it's just Michael and Bill. Anyone else in the room? Right now? There will be time for other comments later too, so, okay. So since there is no further comment, we will move to approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of April 29th, 2025?
I will make a motion.
Okay, Heidi moved. Is there a second?
I will second.
Chris seconded. Any discussion? No, okay, so then all in favor of approving the minutes? Aye. And any abstentions?
I'm abstaining.
Susan and Eric are abstaining, Nancy? Okay, excellent. So now we'll move on to item number 5 in the agenda, our discussion on the future land use map and housing targets. And Chris will lead us through that.
Great, thank you. So tonight we are talking about the draft future land use map that the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission has released for public comment. They also have some draft housing targets for the region and some specific targets for Jericho. So we're going to be going over that tonight. If you remember, the CCRPC, the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, CCRPC, presented to the commission in January and gave an overview of their effort to update the regional land use plan. This is a directive that's coming from the state. It's the first time that there are consistent land use designations that are being applied statewide, and the regional planning commissions are taking the lead in doing that. So we're looking at specifically what Chittenden County CCRPC has proposed for the county and for Jericho. So we've got 3 goals for tonight's meeting. One is just to make sure we all understand the proposed future land use map designations and how they're applying to Jericho. So we'll walk through that. We'll also review the draft map specifically for Jericho and the housing targets for Jericho. And we're going to hear about our working group's recommendations on both and provide feedback to the working group. So first, a big thank you to the working group. It's been Susan Bressie, S.J. Doobie, Sabina Ernst, and myself. We've met several times. We met twice in February and once in April. We met with CCRPC twice, with their staff twice. We provided some initial feedback on a draft future land use map that they sent out. And then they have sent out their map now that the public is commenting on, and we've reviewed that and we've pulled together some initial comments on that. So formal comments on the future land use map and the targets need to come from the select board by the end of June. So the planning commission, what we're doing is we're pulling together our recommendations to forward to the select board so that they can make their ultimate decision. Part of that includes Jericho possibly asking for what's called Tier 1B status, which would extend the current Act 250 exemptions for certain land use and for certain permits in certain areas. In terms of our timeline for getting through this, at least to the end of May, the plan is for the planning commission tonight to discuss the working group's recommendations. We'll have CCRPC staff attend our next meeting on May 20th to hear what our initial recommendations are and have them answer any questions that we might have before finalizing our recommendations and sending them on to the select board. Nothing is planned on this for our June 5th meeting. I'm holding that in case there are any unresolved issues we might want to circle back to, but hopefully we'll be able to work things out by the end of our May 20th meeting. In terms of coordinating with the select board, we have CCRPC staff scheduled to give the select board an overview of their process, similar to what they presented to us back in January, so that they just have a general idea of what's going on, so that when they get our recommendations, there's some context for that for them to consider, which hopefully they'll do at their June 19th meeting. I'm saying June 19th, that is when the select board is currently scheduled to meet. That's a federal holiday, so that may move. So stay tuned for that. Any questions about timeline? And great. All right. So just to give a little background. So here is where we are starting with the region's current future land use map for Chittenden County and Jericho. You can see it's pretty basic. At least in Jericho, it's just a village and rural designations for the town. This existing map also had a transportation overlay district along Route 15 in Jericho. That's not shown on this map. That's also going away. So this is just where we're starting from. The updated future land use map is going to include more land use categories, and these are the ones that are established by the state, so that, like I said, all municipalities are going to be using the same classifications. They go from more intense and urban on the left, you can see on the screen, to more agricultural and rural, which is on the right. Not all of these are being applied to Jericho. So you can see the ones that have an X on them, those are ones that are not being applied to Jericho. I'll talk a little more about what each of the ones that are being applied to Jericho mean on the next slide. But what you should also see here is that at the bottom, the village center and village area designations are one that are targeted for growth and eligible for some exemptions. So you can see at the bottom of the screen, it says Tier 1A full exemption, Tier 1B partial exemption. Those applies for like those pink and darker areas on the right side of the screen. Let me get to the slide and then looking at, okay, yeah. I'll talk a little bit about the Tier 1A and Tier 1B designations here. We're going to get into it a little more later. But these are designations that municipalities have to formally request. Jericho is only eligible for the Tier 1B designation. Tier 1A means, I'll just get into it here in a little bit. Tier 1A, municipalities can take over all Act 250 regulatory review. The only municipalities that really meet the criteria for that or have the capacity to do that are much larger cities like Burlington or South Burlington. Jericho doesn't meet the criteria to apply for Tier 1A. We don't have municipal water and sewer, which is one of the criteria, and we just don't have the staff capacity to take over all of the Act 250 reviews. We would qualify for Tier 1B, which is a partial exemption, and it just extends the temporary exemptions that are in place. So that would be projects in the village center and village area that have 50 units or less and are on 10 acres or less. The working group is recommending that we request a Tier 1B designation, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Any questions on this before I go on to the next slide? Yes.
So for the regional plan future land use categories, the decision that Jericho was not, is it eligible or did not meet the criteria? I'm curious specifically about the planned growth area. And that was a decision by CCRPs. They're saying that no, Jericho does not, this is my interpretation of the X. They're saying that Jericho does not meet, or doesn't have any of the criteria that would allow for a planned growth area.
Yeah, I would have to go back and look. I don't remember exactly what the definition of a planned growth area is. Do you remember? Yeah.
Kristen, I think the question is who made that decision? Was it us or
Got
was
it.
it the regional?
Yeah,
CCRPC made those recommendations. I think they struggled a little bit. I shouldn't say they struggled, but they worked a little bit to figure out how to apply these new land use designations to the existing designations that Chittenden County had. And these were the ones that made the most sense. I do know when the working group was looking at this, like, we didn't question it. It just seemed to fit right. You have some handouts in front of you. One is just a copy of the future land use map for the region. On the back, there's a description of what those different designations are. I only included the ones that apply to Jericho, so I didn't include the planned growth area because that's not a designation that is applying.
The risk of maybe giving not correct information, but I think the planned growth area was for towns that didn't already have a downtown or a village center. And they wanted to establish a center and an area surrounding the center that would support the center, which, because the current designation has that as a new town center.
Chris?
So, as I was reading through this, it strikes me that the village center and village area designations are confusing or conflicted with the updates we're doing in the town plan, because we just went through this where there was confusion about the village center versus the village neighborhood. And as I read this, it reads to me that the village center is the denser area and the village area is the less dense, which is not how we are currently designating parts of Riverside. So I think we just need to make sure that whatever language we're using matches up. Because I think that, again, I think the village, this implies that the village center is the core and the village area is the broader surrounding. So that's doesn't match up with our proposed language. So I just would suggest that we make those match up.
I understand what you're saying. It's a little tricky because the village neighborhood is a third category that is actually within a village center.
But it doesn't, according to who?
So our zoning right now has village centers and villages, right? So the village centers are what we've been focused on, as looking at BMG, and then there are 3 village centers. There's Riverside,
So the
Jericho
village,
Corners, and Jericho Center.
right, so the village area that CCRPC has, does that relate to our village neighborhood? Or it's just a totally different thing?
I see.
I think the village neighborhood in Riverside is all in the village center land use category from CCRPC.
Correct. So if you look at the handout, right?
I think we're confusing.
Yeah. So if you look at the darker area that's designated a village center.
Yeah.
Just for this discussion, let's say that perfectly aligns with our village center zone district. Also, for the purposes of this discussion, let's just say that this pink area aligns with our village district zone. The village neighborhood is a smaller area
Okay.
within the village center.
Is that, did we come up with that designation ourselves?
Which
Village neighborhood?
David did as a way of migrating from the current Riverside zoning, which had CD3 and CD4. And we were like, that's one, complicated, two, it seems a little, the mapping of that wasn't exactly what we wanted to see, but we didn't think it was appropriate for the whole village to be incorporated into the new Riverside form-based code. And so what David created, he, I think, combined CD3 and CD4 mostly, not 100% perfectly, but into one Riverside Village Center. And then some of the supporting area, he made that the Riverside village neighborhood, which is the rest of the quote unquote village center, currently the designated village center, which is not in the form-based code.
So when the typical, so this map and these designations, will this be on record in our town documents somewhere?
So this is the regional land use map that our zoning should be consistent with.
So as somebody. Okay,
So this won't be our map. It will be CCRPC's regional land use map. And then as Jericho updates its zoning and sends things to CCRCP. Yeah.
are we the only town, do you think, that has another category that we've made up?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but it's not that the categories don't align. The land use categories on the land use map, like the wording and the names, they don't align with the names of zoning districts.
So how is the average developer, person, or citizen supposed to navigate the
Yeah.
differences between these two things?
So I think I'm going to answer your question this way. So how they're like, how many, like over 200 municipalities in the state of Vermont, and they've all gone off and they've all developed their own zoning. However, they've developed their own zoning. The regional planning commissions have also gone off and developed their own land use plans. However, they've do it. I think this is the first step for the state to actually try to have a more coordinated approach. I have not heard anything about coming up with zoning designations that get applied to statewide. I don't think that would fly very well in Vermont, but this is at least an attempt to bring some continuity in the land use map, future land use map designations for all the regional planning commissions.
So in an ideal world, this would marry up exactly with our town zoning.
I guess you could.
If it
Our
doesn't-
zoning should be consistent with the future land use map. And there are different ways of interpreting.
So a
There'd be different ways to
developer
interpret that.
interested in doing a project in Jericho, would they ever see this? They would never see this.
No,
No, the main output or outcome of the designations is the Act 250 exemption and also the town's ability to qualify for different levels of state support and investment. So the average person and the average developer is probably not really going to interact with this on a detailed basis, but trying to do that syncing that you're looking for is what we worked on. Because the CCRPC's initial draft to us was not consistent enough with either our current zoning or the new zoning. And that was the arm wrestling we did with them because they had, their reasons and their criteria, and we had our reasons and our criteria.
I would also say, I don't know how much we looked at. I mean, we did look at zoning, but we more looked at the future land use plan and the town plan.
Right, that's
To make sure that that was consistent with the region's future land use map.
So by what criteria are we as a planning commission or Jericho as a town what criteria are we using to assess this? Since it doesn't line up with our zoning?
I would say what we used was the future land use map in the town plan. And we're going to get to that. There's a slide that puts those two up on the screen and we say, well, here's where there's inconsistencies, here's where it's consistent. Based on this, the working group made its recommendations. I think you are logically jumping ahead to how this applies to zoning and how this works to zoning, but this is like taking a step back and making sure that the future land use first, we wanted to make sure that the future land use map was not inconsistent with our zoning, as well as the future land use map. And we wanted to make sure that it sort of set the stage for when we go to update the zoning, that it gives us support.
Can I ask one more question?
Please.
So when we talk about development in town, we talk about the village centers, 3 of them, and the commercial district. The commercial district is not designated on this as a village center. So does that mean it would miss out on potential opportunities for development from the state?
Yes. But, and we're gonna get to this. Well, maybe I'm just gonna jump ahead. I'm gonna answer your question on the next slide.
That's fine.
Yeah. Are there any other questions on,
What we saw in January.
this is a second draft.
Second.
You're right. We saw a very early draft. The working group provided comments. They incorporated some of those comments and then they released this for public.
This might not be the same map that's on their website under Jericho.
Yeah, it should be.
Is it? Okay.
I have one last request.
Yeah.
Just as we move on, just, because Chris Brown, I was confused in much the same way and had the same questions. As we move forward, if and when there are decisions that need to be made, having a cheat sheet would be incredibly helpful.
With what?
The differences between the categories that they're using and the categories that we use. Because these are mental gymnastics that you thankfully have really dug into and understand, but for those of us who are showing up, not having had to do that intense thinking that you did, it's a little bit harder to catch up.
Understood. What we do have now
Yeah,
is, I think, half of the equation.
okay,
It's what CCRPC has and what they are defining.
exactly. So if we had then the cheat sheet, which is the reminder, which we have in different places, here's our definitions and where they line up and where they don't line up.
Yeah.
That next level would be super helpful if we needed to understand to make decisions.
Well, and we make it, I think there's a slide that's going to get to that. It
Yeah.
doesn't have all the definitions on it, but I think it has the information you're looking for.
I'll be patient.
Thank you. All right. I'm gonna go, oh, yes.
Sorry.
Nope.
When does the future begin? Like when?
Today is the future.
Is this?
Right.
When they, are they got all that? So when we adopt this plan, that's what we're using. That's like.
We're never using this.
Yeah. So I think it gets adopted in like July by the Regional Planning Commission, right? It becomes ours only in the sense that we are part of Chittenden County. And so it applies to us. But it is not Jericho's future land use map. It is the Regional Planning Commission's future land use map. We have our own future land use map in the town plan. All of these things need to line up. The reason why Chittenden CCRPC is going through this process is to get input from all the municipalities to make sure that our town, the future land use plan is like there's not conflicts and that they're lined up as much as possible. Like I said, Chris logically jumped ahead to zoning, but kind of put that off to the side for now because we're just talking about future and land use classifications for looking into the future. We will want to make sure that zoning aligns with it, but this is like the first step in doing that. Susan or Sabina, do you want either? I know you've been involved in these.
I don't know, should we just?
I don't
keep
have
going?
anything to add
Okay.
at the
I think
moment.
we should just
Yeah.
keep going.
Great.
I think hopefully things will become more clear.
Yeah, okay, so on that previous slide, there were some X's and some boxes around certain land use. Okay, so the ones that have the boxes around them, these are what they are. So there are 6 land use classifications being applied to Jericho. They are village center, that's the dark magenta color, and village area, which is the pink. Those are the areas I would say that are like targeted for growth. These are ones that are eligible for Tier 1B designation and Act 250 exemptions. They are also eligible for community improvement program benefits. So that would be like applying for municipal planning grants or infrastructure funding, or there's some wastewater fees that get exempted or some tax, there's like it's the state's programs for promoting growth. That's where they would be prioritized in those areas.
CCRPC came up with these demarcations. They said this is going to be the magenta, this is going to be the pink, this is going to be the yellow.
Yes, but they're not like totally made up. Like the magenta areas align with what I don't know what they were called. What were they called before? It was like our village center designation.
Yes, the designated village center, but when we met with them, that was some of the work that we did, is we encouraged them to make changes based on XYZ reasons. And some of those changes they made, which are now incorporated into this map, and some of those changes they did not make.
But we'll get to that. But
Yeah.
right now,
So
I just want to make sure we know what those designations are and what they mean. Right, so the village center is the more intense area and the village area is the less intense area, but they're both targeted for growth. And those generally line up with like our village zone and our village center zone. The transition area, this is getting to your previous question, Chris, about the commercial zone. So the commercial zone is currently not in a village center designation, but we're interested in getting it there.
Is it in the transition zone? I guess?
It's orange.
Okay.
Yeah, it's shown in orange. Also, the area out by the high school at the intersection of Brown's Trace, Packard and Morgan. So the town plan identified that as a potential new hub or new growth area. So we have identified, this shows them both as transition areas, which is basically identifying them as areas for us to do future planning, where we can look at later and adjust zoning or figure out how we want to deal with them. So those are the three I would say that are more in like the growth category. The other three are more rural designations. So there's three that get applied to Jericho here. One is rural general, another is rural ag forest. The third is rural conservation. So of those three, there are no Act 250 exemptions, and there are no community improvement benefits that get applied to those areas. Those are getting targeted toward the growth areas. I'll say the rural general and the rural ag forest are both areas that can support or are intended to support housing, but in coordination with protecting natural resources. So like maybe a PD that has a cluster of housing and the rest of the area is set aside for conservation or protected areas, as opposed to the rural conservation, which is really where the most important natural resources are that we really want to protect. Those get put in a category that's called Tier 3, which I didn't cover before because the state still needs to figure out exactly what that Tier 3 is. Did that answer some of your questions, Chris?
And these, again, it was CCRPC that came up with these designations. They colored the map.
They follow them.
Yes, but maybe this would be a good time to talk a little bit about the feedback we gave them and how we got here.
When they colored the map, like, how well do they know Jericho?
I think they knew it pretty well.
Yeah, pretty well.
Okay.
So before I go to the next slide, I hadn't incorporated this into the discussion, but I think it would be really helpful for us all to know. So some of the things that, and I'm winging it here, so working group members, feel free to jump in. Some of the things that we looked at on the first map was we wanted to expand the village area, the pink area. We looked at extending the village center, the intense one for Jericho Corners, a little further north on Old Pump Road. So we did document, and so part of the state's land use policy is these should reflect historic centers, historic community centers. So we found documentation that showed like one of the mill privileges along Browns River was on the other side of the Browns River on Old Pump Road. So we showed that as documentation. The lots on the north side of Browns River are a little smaller. So we use that to say, look, this is part of the traditional village center. We do think that this designation should expand in this area. So they made that change. Initially, they had much less of the area in that triangle between Route 15, River Road, and Orr Road. They had less of that designated as a village. We pushed them to expand the pink into that area.
The town plan has even.
Yes, don't forget that, because we're gonna circle back to that. They had their own reasons for having reservations about doing that. They were looking at like where our existing water surface is. Because that was one of the factors that they were looking at, is like, well, where's the infrastructure that's going to support this growth? We worked with them to figure out what the transition areas were. So I don't think they may have identified the commercial area as a transition area. We pushed them to include the one out on Brown's Trace.
Or vice versa, do you remember?
Well, the
I don't know if we had any transition in the first draft.
They might not have, and that was something that we talked to them about and to get
Yeah.
included.
But they did have some strict criteria about village area also that were based on distances from the village centers. And the current village center designation boundaries was another criteria that they looked at, so you were pretty constrained and as to how much you could expand the village center beyond the current designation. And then how much distance from the village center a village area could be.
So we pushed them, I think, to the extent of where they were comfortable, but we're going to get to it. The working group's recommendation is to even push them further on that. Another initial, well, I guess this was something that CCRPC came up with. They were looking at lot sizes across Jericho, and they wanted to take that into consideration when they were looking at some of the rural designations. And I think that's why a lot of that area in the outlying areas is showing up as this rural general, which is that tan color, because those are lots that I think are less than 10 acres or.
The lot sizes that exist, not the zoning
Correct.
requirements, okay.
Are there any questions about these 6 land use categories? What they mean? Okay, and is there a general understanding of, you can just see on the map how they're generally applied? Okay. All right, now we are getting into sort of the analysis part. So I think for the most part, the working group thought that the future land use map generally aligned with the future land use map in the town plan, although we did have some recommendations that we just kind of just covered. So here are some of the things that the working group likes about what they have proposed and how it aligns with the town plan. It did extend, we did get them to extend more of that village area in that triangle between Route 15, Lee River Road and Orr Road. We did get them to expand the village center a little bit along Old Pump Road like we talked about. There is that neighborhood infill, which is that yellow color on our map, on the town's map. They use that rural general to align with that. So in our map, that is what the yellow is, what's aligning with our low density residential, which is the 3-acre zone. And they compared that to the rural general, which is rural but allows for some residential development that takes into account, some protections
And some commercial.
and some limited commercial. Yeah. The rest of the town, at least on our map, is all designated either agricultural and conservation or natural resource conservation. Generally, that's what their future land use map shows, although they are extending a lot more of that rural general into those outlying areas. You'll see that there's more rural general designation. So keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that because that's part of the working group's recommendations is, we questioned whether that was too extensive, but if that's something we should talk about. For working group, is there anything else you want to highlight that I missed?
I would just give an example of how much scrutiny. So it wasn't just a meeting where it was like, oh, we think this and we think that. For example, like Chris was saying, he went back and looked at like historical documents of Jericho in like the 1800s or something to be able to document around Old Pump Road. The other thing that made a difference is that there was a preferred alternative for connecting Jericho Corners to Riverside that the select board had selected. You remember that project that will extend the sidewalk to Packard and Raceway and cross that road. And that was like 3 meetings into it before they would agree to extend their village area to that area. And that was the linchpin that enabled them to justify the expansion. So I guess that's just an example where they were really requiring town plan documentation or other plan documentation, like really serious justification and rationale to either expanding or contracting an area.
From the practical matter, can I just go back and affirm that I understand it from a practical perspective? CCRPC is going to have these designations, whether we like them or not. We're going to try our best to like them and have them modified because that will enable us to benefit from certain designations that would allow us either to more easily move some development and or access resources that are available through the state because they fit those categories, right? And for the ones where it doesn't align, it doesn't prevent us from doing the kind of zoning or development that we want in the other areas. It just means that we will not have the additional backing of the state resources.
I think that's right. I think if we wanted, well, let me back up and say the future land use map that they're proposing, all of the benefits that we currently have in terms of how the state is allocating resources to our village centers is the same. Like it's not like none of those areas are getting smaller. They're increasing a little bit. So I think that's yeah. What this is setting up is, say we have an area here that's designated as agriculture and conservation, or it's their agriculture forestry zone, right? If we decided we wanted to create a new village center and have 1/4 acre lots there or something like that, and we went through all the work and proposed zoning amendments and sent them to CCRPC as part of their review, like they probably have an issue with that. And I don't think they could prevent us from doing it, but they would certainly want to sit down and talk to us and would make it more difficult for us to do that.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm just thinking about where we know we are in terms of the work that we've done related to the town plan, and we started off smaller with the 3 designated centers and the municipal planning grant that we have. And we have continued to, I think this gentleman here sort of said, like, are you going to have the conversation about mandatory lot sizes in other parts of town and things like that? So I'm sort of thinking ahead to those things.
Yes.
And wanting to try to understand the extent to which this decision-making at this moment that CCRP is asking for will either promote or impede or just be sort of in parallel.
Yes.
In a sense to the other things that we have to do.
Yes. So like in other municipalities where I have worked, any zoning changes that you make, they have to be consistent with the future land use plan. So if you have a future land use designation that is agriculture, there's no basis for rezoning it to commercial.
Does designating an area as transition, is that the same rigorous documentation process as designating something as village center or village area?
I would say yes, although it wasn't as rigorous for us because our town plan already clearly identified that. So we didn't have to do all that additional research to show where the town boundary, where the mill privileges were in 1890.
So, to what extent or in what way does it matter what's yellow, what's orange, and what's green?
Are you looking at ours or theirs?
I'm looking at theirs because it's what's in front of me, but
I see.
I'm looking at theirs. So, and I guess my question is, since a lot of it seems, I mean, I can understand the basic parameters, but some of it, like some of the distinction between the yellow and the green seems somewhat random. And does that matter?
We're going to get to that.
Okay. And would we want to push for more orange?
Yeah, that was.
I wondered if that's what you were going for.
Yeah.
We could, but I would say based on what?
Well, I remember talking or thinking about the town plan, that sort of triangle in the center as being.
I see.
Sort of, in my
Yes.
mind, I could see that all being orange.
The golden triangle, Chris?
Exactly.
So, what's next? Okay. So we're nearing the end of one of the first goals of the meeting,
Excellent.
which is understanding their map and their designations. So are there any questions about that? Great. Okay. I'm going to jump ahead. This slide shows what the working group's recommendations are to change their future land use map. And these changes would be what the working group thinks would make it more consistent with what our future land use map designation is in our town plan. So there are two big things. One is that area that's all shown in red. That's that area of the triangle that they had as a rural general designation. And we think that it should be a village designation.
And that's basically Packard and Orr Road.
Yeah, so I'm gonna jump back to this one because you can see here's the triangle right here.
Yeah.
And then on theirs, they have a big chunk of that area as rural general. We think that rural general area should be that village designation. So that's one. So one of the recommendations is to expand the village area into that area. The other is looking at all of those areas. I'm gonna go back, Jim. All of these areas on our town plan, which we have designated in this green color. You can see on their map, they've got this. It's like tan, but that's a rural designation. We felt that was not necessarily consistent. But I think that's an area that the planning commission should discuss. Because that tan color is still a rural designation. the working group definitely had a problem that this rural designation, that rural general was also being applied to this area that we wanted to see this growth. So that was like a big sticking point for us. So these are what the working group's recommendations are. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to go over. I can just describe it more specifically. So it would be extending the village area designation to some areas designated rural general so that it includes the whole area within Route 15, Lee River Road and Orr Road. And also designating more areas currently shown as rural general as a rural ag forest.
But you're not including it all the way over to the river. Your proposed red division does not go all the way over to the river.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a mistake.
Oh.
It should include that area.
It's back.
But it
Yeah.
should go all the way to the river.
Yes,
Okay.
right?
I think it was both sides of Packard, but there's a big hill there in the middle. and
Oh,
then the
right,
other
yes,
side's a
yes.
Farm. So the topography, you don't get a sense of the topography when you look at the flat map, but
That's right.
so it is Packard Road, not Lee River Road. That was the divider. Orr Road, Brown's Trace, I think
Yeah.
was the other one. But it was the parcels that had frontage on both sides. And at the beginning of the process, CCRPC said, we are not really mapping the parcel on a parcel by parcel basis. But in a practical sense, it's kind of how it wound up happening, and that's how we discussed it with them. But anyway, so that I think is both sides of Packard Road.
So the working group suggestion is that the red outlined area is going to become orange.
No,
Village.
village, pink.
Pink.
Oh, pink, okay. And the yellow outlined areas are going to be
Green, light green.
the rural ag forest.
Yes.
Okay.
That is what the working group is recommending for the planning commission to discuss.
And so you are not currently recommending, this is Wendy was starting to go down the idea of any other transition, the need for any other transition areas. So for example, if the CCRPC, if we propose the red area to turn it to pink, right?
Yeah.
Then we don't need more transition zones. But if they don't agree to it, would a transition zone be our backup idea then? And you don't have to answer that now. I'm just thinking, and that might be more of a strategic question, but there's, just so that we don't, because I think, Wendy, what I understood you to say was that you were sort of hoping that everything that we call the golden triangle could be transition. Could, if it can't be village designation, then it should be, we want to propose it to be transition.
Yeah.
I think oh, go ahead.
Well, wondering what other parts of town could also be transitioned. Like, I want to make sure. I think the commercial district is marked district by right there. Are all
Yes.
the parcels in the district.
Mhm.
And there's other places, now I'm not basing this on anything but a visual, but like I'm seeing an area that's currently general, that's in between two kings. Like, that to me,
That's the town forest.
up here,
Oh.
this, maybe that's Palmer.
So.
Is that over here?
You're right,
Right, okay.
further, further up.
Further to the right.
Oh,
up
here.
there.
I'm thinking about, I think that's Palmer, is that Palmer, maybe? I don't know, but like,
It's on the raceway.
it's a question, like, if you're, if the purpose of a transition zone is to bridge village, that to me seems like that might be a place to have it transition, plus they're larger parcels, so maybe there might be some opportunity if the landowners are interested.
Where is this?
Right,
Here,
yeah,
That foothills, no.
Foothills is here.
It's Alpine, yeah, that's one. Up the raceway. Opposite of Valley Edge, Valley.
Is that,
That's,
That's
Valley Edge?
Valley's Edge is here.
and that's foothills. This
That's
raceway here.
This is Valley's Edge. If you see where the arrow is on the screen, this is
Yeah.
Valley Edge here.
Yeah.
So this is, but,
Okay.
and this is Foothills, just for more context.
I think we did talk to him about that, and his pushback was that it was too far to be village, but we didn't talk to him about it being transition.
And our future land use, the town's future land use map has it designated as agriculture and conservation.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
And so was also part of the conversation sort of mapping the hard housing targets to the map.
No. So. Yeah, it totally is, and that's just the sequencing of how this is rolling out. Like, it would have been great to get the housing targets and then for us to be able to do some analysis to figure out where land use designations should align so that we can meet those targets, and that's just not how this is sequencing.
remind me again, what is the significance of your proposed yellow areas going to green? In what way will that impact Jericho going forward?
Well, the differences are, and I summarized, let me go back to this slide because it summarized them a little bit. The rural general, which is that tan color, it allows for low density residential, limited commercial, but also protects natural resources and working land. So, but it's sort of like what our low density residential zoning is, if you want to make that connection, as opposed to the rural ag forest, which are predominantly natural areas, but they can support managed growth.
So what is the working group's reason for making more of CCRPC's yellow areas green?
I think it was looking at the town plans future land use map and wanting them to be more consistent.
But in terms of benefits or penalties from CCRPC or the state, the designation is not as important. Is that correct?
Correct, because it's a they're both rural designations that have no community investment program benefits, and there are no exemptions.
So
From
we
Act
don't need to get
250.
too hung up on that.
No, actually, on the big chart that he showed, they're in the same box.
Yeah.
If you go
I'll
back
go
to the
back.
very beginning, they're little subsets of the same box. Oh, right there. So if you look all the way where it says rural, they're all in there. So they're, from their point of view, that's
Mhm.
sort of the same category.
Mhm.
It seemed like they were being more reactive. They were kind of like looking at the current land use rather than the future land use, and it was sort of like responding to what has been in those areas, not really planned growth, but more sort of organic, somewhat haphazard growth. And whereas the town plan talks about that as like intentional growth, where we use planned unit development, clustered housing, open space set asides, seemed more consistent with what the intention is going forward, as opposed to just mapping it the way that it is now.
I think one thing that Darren said to us was that, because we questioned, you know, how many different colors there were in the rural, right? And we asked if that could be simplified, and what he said to us is that they have to look at the entire county and make every town fit into their box. And so they had to come up with these delineations in order to kind of cover all the possibilities within the county. So that this is not just a Jericho legend, right? It covers everything. So they're trying to make it be everything for everyone, which is a little tedious and complicated, but that's sort of where they were coming from. And that's why they said, no, we can't just make it two colors like you're asking. We have to account for all the other towns in Chittenden County.
Yeah, I do think, my thinking has evolved on this a little bit since from the working group. Because my biggest reaction was the colors that they were using, because that tan color makes it look like all that rural designation is going away. But it's not, it's still a rural designation. And it could help us say, okay, well, if we really want to emphasize on emphasize clustering development in some of these rural areas that still have maybe 70% set aside as open space, and clustering cottage courts or something out in this area, that rural general designation could help inform where those go. Now, that's kind of at a high level. It's not like we've gone through and said, what's the topography? What's their septic capacity, right? We just haven't had the capacity or the time to actually do that level. And I think, Wendy, that's getting to, I think where you're asking, like, how is this aligning with our housing targets? Like, we just haven't had the ability to look at it that way.
To me, you bring up a really important point there with looking at the topography and the capacity of the soils that are in some of these areas. Because if we don't have sewer, which who knows when that is ever going to happen, septic capacity becomes the most valuable piece of any property. And without looking at the soils on this and looking at the proposed changes, are we potentially shooting ourselves in the foot by taking extremely good land for septic and development and taking it out of the circulation? This was a lot of that stuff that is in the orange, and the yellow was 50, 60 years ago, prime farmland, which generally has good drainage, good soils. It's valuable, you want to keep it because it's farmland. It could potentially at some point, with a massive investment of hydrocarbons to cut down all the trees that have grown there, be used as farmland again. It could also be used as housing and wastewater disposal.
But this doesn't preclude that.
If it gets designated into rural ag
It's
forest.
already in rural. The yellow is already rural.
Right, the proposal is to take a lot of that in these maps and turn it into green.
Right,
The
but-
point is that it doesn't matter. The yellow is still rural.
But the yellow allows more development than the straight blue does.
No,
No.
there's no difference.
Well,
Well, wait a second, I thought that I read the difference. There is a difference.
I think there is a difference. I think it's rural that's more accommodating for like residential and even some light commercial, whereas opposed to the green, which is conservation areas that can accommodate some housing. It's a subtle difference, but I don't know how subtle it
But it's
is.
right there in the first sentence. Rural ag and forestry, these areas include large blocks of forest or farmland that sustain resource industries, provide critical wildlife, scenic beauty, and contribute to the economic development and quality of life. Whereas rural general, these are areas that promote preservation of Vermont's traditional working landscape and natural features, allow for low density residential and some limited commercial development. So there is a difference in those two, in the way they're defined.
Yes, but this doesn't directly influence necessarily Jericho zoning.
No, it doesn't. My statement is only that if we were to make the proposed changes, the additional zoning in yellow that we have on your next slide, we are putting a lot of what is currently rural general into rural ag forestry.
It could mean that Jericho, if we went with their land use map that has that tan on the green, it could be that Jericho develops another zoning classification that emphasizes clustered development surrounded by working landscape, whatever that's described there. That's exactly what like a future land use map is supposed to be doing, like
Or
it's,
migrate the current low density residential potentially
yeah,
to line up
yes.
with that.
But in my mind, there's a pretty random quality to their yellow versus green.
Right, because it was
Scattershot.
it wasn't proactive. That's exactly why when we looked at it, it is scattershot because it was more a reflection of kind of random criteria. It was not really, and that's why we considered whether or not that was really the right designation.
Yeah, I think, and correct me, I think they primarily looked at lot sizes.
Yeah,
And the reason why, like, I question that is because some of those properties are really big, but I think they're part of PUDs where they're land that's set aside and they're associated with the smaller ones.
Can you go to the next one, which is your recommendations? Right? So, just to go back and close the loop here, so what you have as circled by the yellow, you are suggesting that those would become rural ag and forestry? Okay, I'm just making sure that I have myself oriented.
Yes, and I would say the basis for that recommendation from the working group was looking at the future land use map that was adopted in the town plan
Okay.
and wanting the CCRPC's future land use map to better align with that.
And this still, again, so the two things we talked about as our long range future for zoning and planning and whatnot were one, the golden triangle, and revisiting whether or not we were going to continue to support the idea of the lot sizes that exist in the different zoning districts currently beyond the 3 centers. By doing this, are we stopping ourselves?
Can you say that second part again?
So sorry. So the second part was that, I think it was the question that this gentleman asked, like, at what point are we also going to look at just our general categories for zoning now and whether or not, and we will continue the same suggestion for lot sizes. So will it still be 3?
Are you referring to the protect more rural areas on this map?
I
Or the
wanna-
entire map?
This one here, this here, is there anything about this protect more rural areas that are outlined in the yellow that precludes us from later moving to either the golden triangle or the revisiting that maybe some of our current zoning that you have to have 10 acres, you need to have 3 acres, might have some opportunity to revisit because our goals are about 8,000. I'm sorry, is that still confusing?
So if we change the zoning and protect more rural areas, does that prevent us from at some future point allowing for density development in those areas?
Right, so this isn't changing zoning, but it will change the future map for the county. And is there anything by making these recommendations for changing the future map for the county, precluding us from some of our later deliberations?
Yeah, so I'll answer it this way. So say Jericho wanted to adopt zoning changes that encourage clustering of development and setting aside land for something else, right? So when I'm writing my report, the CCRPC, I'm gonna be wanting to be using these descriptions to back up what our recommendations are, because our zoning should be consistent, right? So if we wanted to take that approach in that rural general area, which allows housing but focuses on maintaining traditional working landscapes and natural area features, whatever that is, I would want to say, okay, we've crafted this regulation to that we are protecting working landscape and natural area features, and this is how we're doing it. If we were looking at doing that in the rural ag and forestry area, well, first we'd say, these are the criteria that we have come up with to define what a working landscape is and what a natural feature it is, and this is what we're prioritizing, and this is how it's described in the zoning and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, right? For the rural ag forestry, rural, that talks about the priority is, managing and promoting working landscapes for the rural economy, right? There's some, we would want to say, okay, as we've written our zoning, it's identified areas that are contributing to the rural economy, so there would be nuances in how the zoning was written, but we could still do what we want to do. Does that answer?
That's very helpful. I just want to
Okay.
make sure we're not inadvertently backing ourselves into a corner when we know what our bigger goals are over time. And the kinds of conversations we've been asked to have by the town, right? So I'm just poking at it from a few angles.
I think the designations would just inform what we are prioritizing and protecting in outlying areas and where and how and where we are promoting residential
Yeah.
development or limited commercial if it's in a rural general area. Working group people, I mean, great, I see nodding, okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I really struggle with maps, so it helps a lot to describe it. Thank you.
Do you want feedback on your proposed yellow areas?
Yes, so we are now at part of the second goal, which is, so we're getting, it'd be good to get feedback on the recommendations from the working group for the land use map. We're also going to do this for the tier 1B designation, and we're also going to do this for the housing targets. But right now, we're looking specifically for feedback on the land use designations.
So I agree that if what you circled as yellow goes to green, it more coincides with the map in the town plan, but I guess it's making me question that map. Because I would think that there are certain areas like along 117 that might be fine to be yellow, to be what CCRP is using as yellow. Or the area in, near West Bolton where there's already development, there could be a little bit more development there. It's a sort of a clustered area. So I would think that it could be refined a little bit.
One other thing that map is missing though is the wetlands overview, overlay. Like that.
Right.
Right, so it would be helpful if we could see the CCRP map that also has some of the overlays, natural resource.
And I would say that, like Skunk Hollow, it's already sort of developed. Why would that not just be yellow? The CCRPC yellow, not very yellow.
Okay, so 117 Skunk Hollow, are there any
Well, and I
other?
think like West Bolton area. And I'm trying to align them with the map of my picture of the areas.
I'm not sure how much of that land that you're looking at the north of this, of Jericho Center, the west is developable at all. It'd be great to see a
Where are
topography.
you pointing to?
I think it's this area here.
That little right there.
I want a bigger one below that.
Well, the one,
Isn't the upper section the stuff with the fire, near the firehouse? I'm sorry.
I think
I think
that's still in the pink, actually, I think, right?
well, here is plains, here's river, or is that right? Yeah.
And to Eric's point about like not knowing like where the appropriate soils or like where are the different overlays, it's hard for me to make recommendations for changes because it feels a little arbitrary. Like I was, at one point I was thinking, like, well, probably if we could split categories. If we don't pay attention to, boundaries, lot boundaries, if we could say like along the road maybe is rural general, and then if we're trying to, have larger intact habitat blocks that are away in the interior of a lot, that have that as a different designation. But I don't even know if that's reasonable, because I don't know what's going on the ground.
If I could, I guess I would, I want to let others talk about the protected rural areas. Because I'm not tracking and I don't know my town as well, because I just don't do geography. But what I would say conceptually, because of what this map, the purpose that it serves, which is to make it easier, in my mind, the benefit to us is if it makes it easier for us to get money from the state or technical assistance from the Regional Planning Commission. I want as much as we possibly can to fit in the village center, village area, and transition infill areas. We don't ever have to actually develop them. But if this is what gives us permission to then go to the state and the rural folks to say, if and when we do want to develop it, we can access state resources. I would argue for putting more in those categories. And I'm not gonna fuss as much if somebody else wants to care about rural versus rural agriculture or rural conservation. Because in the scheme of things, the way that this policy is set up right now, as you were saying, Susan, it's all rural. It doesn't qualify us for any of the benefits that could possibly come to us by conforming with the CCRPC or having alignment with CCRPC.
And that was the bias of the working group, which is why it took us 3 meetings
Yes,
to get the pink expanded.
Yeah. so I
As
love
we
that.
did,
Yeah,
and this last bit, we feel like they were still missing. And we wanted the gravitas of the entire planning commission behind us when we go back and say, this is not enough, it needs to be more. Because this is our plan.
so I for one totally support that strategy that you all have. So absolutely with the red and moving it into pink. What's here red, but pink on theirs. And if we are incapable of convincing them that it should be pink, ask for a transition zone.
And what is the timeline? I mean, is this a 20-year plan, a
No.
50-year plan?
It's like our town plan.
8
to
years.
10.
I think they said they're required to update it in 8 years.
So it's on almost the same sequence as our town plan.
Okay.
So it's an evolving process.
Okay.
They also admitted, they're not gonna get it perfect the first time around, kind of like our town meeting reimagined, where they were very clear. They were like, we're not gonna get it 100% perfect. And you're right, we've all gotten to the crux of the issue, which is that the pinks and potentially the orange will deliver known direct possible benefits.
Yeah.
And the tan and the light green and the dark green actually has also a very specific definition. So that was pretty black and white, even though it's green, but pretty black and white. And we talked about this, like the yellow and the green, like, aren't they really sort of the same? And that was, I guess that was my framing, was that currently the yellow is sort of haphazard and reactionary, and the light green would be more planned and intentional as your rationale. I don't know, though, that 5 years from now, there might not be other benefits from the state available to some of these other colors, like, assistance removing invasive species, or assistance removing old dams, or assistance divert, taking care of a watershed or something like that where they're, and also since the state is still working on tier 3 for Act 250 and whether or not there'll be any benefits there. So where Heidi, you were like, well, I don't want to, eliminate the opportunity to do the development. I was also thinking, I don't want to eliminate the opportunity for some of those conservation benefits down the road
Sure,
as well. But we were reassured knowing that they would be updating the map in 8 years. And depending on what we do with zoning and what kind of development happens and how much progress we've made by then with septic and with other plans, like as our bike ped plan evolves or as our commercial district master planning process, if we're able to restart that, that would give us a lot more to hang our hat on.
And did they take into consideration wildlife corridors? And I would assume
They did take into consideration all the overlays and what was not available for development from a wetland, river corridor, riparian,
Yeah.
our natural resources overlay. They did look at all those things. And that influenced how they did the map. But I think one follow-up potentially would be, it sounds like there's hesitation about the yellow-green split and that the conversation has offered a few things that potentially we could go back and look at a little bit more closely. Topography, soils, especially proximity to roads and other transportation networks to see if these yellow blobs are still the yellow blobs on May 20th.
Because what that TAN designation does is I think it makes it easier for us to support clustering residential development in the outside areas.
Yeah.
But it still gives us a rural
Yeah.
land use designation, which is kind of like
Having your cake and eating it.
right, it's consistent with our land use plan. And as it's implemented, it could be realized as being consistent with our land use plan. Are there any areas that we have circled up here in yellow that we all agree should not have any tan in it? So like that, I think there's like, oh, well, we should look over here and maybe, but are there some areas that are circled that it's like, yeah, we really should push for that to be conservation? There may not be.
Not conservation, rural ag.
Rural ag, yes, sorry. Right. So, and let me just also make this point. The dark green would be areas that are just like, that's tier 3, that's the most precious resources, no development. The lighter green would be areas where you could have residential development, but it just needs to really have a balance of with working lands as opposed to the tan, which there's more flexibility for
the
development.
working group is proposing that everything circled in yellow be the light green.
That's what the initial proposal was. Yeah,
Well, except for the dark green that's in there.
Sure, yes,
Yeah.
yes, right.
that's what the initial proposal was. I'm sharing that, at least from my viewpoint, my thinking has shifted a little bit. I'm more comfortable with the tan. And what I'm hearing from other planning commission members are that there are some areas up there that are tan that they're also comfortable with. So then I was asking it from the other direction, is that are there some areas that they are showing as tan that we really don't think should be tan?
Argue potentially that bit on Silly Hill up into the corner maybe should be more of a protected area just because of the view sheds that are available off of that. It's steep hill. I don't think you're gonna develop much in there anyway, but there are some great views from up there.
That's interesting you say that, because when we actually had that discussion, I think if it was Old Pump Road or maybe this
You're
road,
saying that at the point of the triangle?
Yeah.
Yeah. In our yellow.
because we did look at a view shed analysis that had been done for Jericho to help inform some of our feedback to CCRPC. It was never completed. I mean, it looked at like 50% of Jericho, right? So it helped us when we were looking at the area just north of Jericho Corners, but I don't think it got up into that area, so we had less information to work with.
Before the trees leaf out completely, it's worth a quick drive up there
Okay.
and come back down.
Where are other commissioners on maybe that area needing to be more conservation versus rural general? But not conservation, the rural ag forestry.
I think I'm still hung up on how the housing targets in this process are not connected. Because it's if the goal is to meet those housing targets, this is like key in meeting those goals. And I'd like to see them merged more. I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, I think that's why, Wendy, I keep pushing for like, why don't we, for the purposes of this exercise, put more things in a category that allows us to do housing, even if we think over time we won't, at least we bought ourselves that time to do that housing connection, because right now, the way it stands, there's no way where we would be able to do that.
I think the TAN does give us more flexibility to
Yeah.
get more.
We'll also add someone who actually lives in the red triangle. I think it's perfectly appropriate to put that into the center.
I appreciate all the work you all have put into this already. This is not straightforward. This is layers of complication.
So Susan and Sabina, so you're also on the working group and you know, we all talked about these yellow area designations. Where is your thinking on that?
I would like, whenever we have our next meeting, I would just like to go down a little more, in a more granular level and look at some of those things more. Like, I'm not, like this one, I don't even think that that's,
She's pointing here.
yeah. I think that's it's either owned by UVM or power company or something like that. I don't even think it's,
You mean the
Any-
green one?
no,
No,
it's
the
to the
tan
left
one.
of it.
big,
Right.
Yeah, right there. I guess that's what I'm saying, if we can look a little more specifically to help us.
Yeah.
Right, 'cause some-
Ourselves make a decision.
Because sometimes it's deceiving. It's
Right.
like, oh, that's tan, it's a big lot. That could be, you know, 20 houses, but not necessarily, because maybe it's in a wetland or maybe.
Well, and that was the realization we had here on this property here, because the topography is such that it's just not.
But the Governor Peck properties have sold and have pending development on them. So I would think that would be tan.
Could I ask for the next
But-
meeting?
In that particular area, the topography is quite difficult and
But they have a plan that works for,
they have a plan that works, but they have a high degree of set aside of land for forestry. So out of 100 acres, 96 acres or something, they're approved for 13 or 17 lots, something to that effect. So they have,
okay,
so they're using PUD there rather than, you know, one house on every 10 acres where you would, if it were tan, you'd get one house on every 10 acres, you'd get a maximum of 9 lots. In green, let's say if your zoning really followed this very well, you would really be kind of doubling down on PUDs, smaller lots, clustered, the majority of the land, like there's something like 60 acres or something is
but
gonna
you can still do
remain
a PUD
open.
in the tan. can't you?
Yes, you could.
Yeah,
But
but that
that's true.
particular lot, I think it's in current use, which is, I think, why it's sort of that color. And they're planning to keep the open space in current use as part of their
Right.
plan, so.
Heidi, what,
On your earlier question.
what do you need that you don't have?
What I need that I don't have for
I'm
next
sorry,
meeting,
AOT.
Yeah,
sort of that,
Thank you, section.
Sabino was saying, could we drill down? I wonder if we had like a large physical printout that actually shows the roads that we could have on the wall. So
Yeah.
that like, those of us who are not as familiar, like I really like, whether it's.
this isn't big enough.
No, right? It would just be so helpful
Yeah.
to be able to see it and maybe, I mean, I'd come in early, just to like have somebody orient
Yep.
me to it, and then as we need to, I think it will ease some of the, it would help land it a little bit easier for me to understand the distinctions that we're making.
We can get that for the next meeting. So the next meeting in terms of our sequencing of things, we should have our recommendations a little more refined so that we can have that discussion with CCRPC, and then they'll be able to say definitively like why.
Yeah.
This isn't why we're going to change. This is why we're not going to change it to transition. This is what our criteria are. Or this is, yes, we can shift this here for village. And this is like, well, we can get into that, I think.
Thank you.
Does CCRP have another version of this map that maybe doesn't have all the boundary lines, but has the soils, that has the wetlands overlays, or something that's.
I have not seen it. I think we asked if this could be added or had been added to the map viewer, because that's great because you can pull all those layers in, and it's not part of that yet. I think this has been super helpful for the working group for the land use map discussion. Any last comments before we move on to another working group recommendation? Okay, we'll move on. Great, so the tier 1B designation. So there are 3 tiers that the state is setting up. That is how they are organizing or thinking about permitting processes and where they're putting funding and that type of stuff, right? So there's tier 1, and we talked about that a little bit, the tier 1A, tier 1B. We don't qualify 1A, we do qualify for tier 1B. That's what we're recommending. The tier 2 would be, it's just the status quo. It's like Act 250 still applies. Things that are exempt would still be exempt. However, there is now a requirement that projects, and I'm just going to say with long roads. So if it's a long road or a subdivision with lots of roads or something that's more sprawling development, even if it previously would be exempt, it will now trigger 250. So that's just a state designation. And I think for us, everything that's not in a tier 1B category, it's most of it I think is going to be tier 2, except for areas that have the highest level of conservation, which will be tier 3. So what the working group is recommending is that we extend the exemptions to make permitting for housing and development as easiest as it can be based on what the state is setting up, and that is the tier 1B designation for the village center and village areas, the magenta and the pink.
Is it a big deal to ask for it?
No,
And does it put any onus on the town?
no.
So
I
it's
think
sort
this
of
is a
no-brainer.
no-brainer, but it needs to be, we just need to discuss it. And then this is going to be the recommendation to the select board, that the select board will formally ask CCRPC to give us this designation, and then they handle it with the state.
And so just to be clear, the designation would only apply to village center, village area.
Yes,
Okay.
and a period.
That's it. It would not apply to transition.
No, but what the transition designation does is it gives us the opportunity to do the planning to eventually move it into that category.
Thank you.
I don't know all the right words. There was a previous designation for the village centers that's going away that this is replacing. Do you know what that is?
Village, designated village center.
Okay. Does that mean anything to?
Yeah.
Okay, so we used to need to reapply every year for that. Okay, we don't need to do that anymore, and if these tiers are taking that place.
And it's a significantly larger area because before, everything was village center only. Now it's gonna be village center and village, which is a much larger area. Yeah, village area, which pretty much though is pretty close.
Mhm.
And it does include the village neighborhood. Not to make it more confusing.
Right, the Riverside Village.
All right,
neighborhood.
so
we're
what
not-
is the downside?
You
Why
can't get it to include the commercial district right now.
Correct. The best we can do for that is get a designated transition, so we can do the additional planning work to move it into that category.
Why wouldn't we do it?
Why wouldn't we ask for tier 1B?
We
Um,
don't want development and we want to stop
Yeah,
housing.
if we wanted to continue to have Act 250 scrutiny on all projects as that are 10 units or more and or 10 acres or more within 5 years, whatever the Act 250 criteria is in all of our town. If that was our desire, then we would not request tier 1B. I think the state, they want that's why they want an explicit action
Yeah.
on the part of the town. It's buy-in.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. I always feel compelled to look at things from both
Yeah,
sides.
no,
Yeah.
it's a good question.
Is this something that we vote on?
Or this is something that we just give you feedback, like we gave feedback on the other?
Yeah, it's like your question, why would we not do this? That's good feedback.
However, when we forward our recommendations to the select board, we will vote to approve our recommendations
Yes,
in a future meeting, and the recommendation sounds like it will include, yes, we think that this is what we should do.
all right, housing targets.
You want public comment on that portion or at the end and
So Chuck, I think you have specific comments on this, right? On the land use?
yeah,
Do we want to,
I mean, the
Yes.
way you've structured the agenda seems like all together.
it doesn't
But
matter to
I'll
me.
let-
I reorganized it a little
Okay.
bit so that we would have discussions as we dealt with
Okay.
things. I think it does make sense, Chuck, if you want to talk now, and do you want me to jump ahead to your side? Chuck was very advanced. He sent me, oh yeah, please do that. So I'm going to jump ahead. So Chuck had shared some information.
Well, I like a lot of the posture. When I first saw this map, I got a meeting with Kate McCarthy and with Darren Scheibel at CCRPC. And said that I shared my concern that what this is doing is institutionalizing our focus on infill as the way to add housing. And I asked them for evidence that infill is possible to a meaningful degree inside suburban neighborhoods, which is what we're counting on. The current projections for the town are to more than double the housing in Jericho Center, a 30% increase in housing in Riverside, a 50% increase in housing, just astronomical numbers. And I asked for evidence that it's possible to add this many houses to a suburban development. This is not 1965. We have to reckon with what we've done over the last 50 years. They had no evidence, they had no examples of where infill in neighborhoods like ours actually produce meaningful housing. And we understand the reasons why infill in these areas is difficult. So I think what's really important is that mean, the densest housing in Jericho is not in the village centers, with the possible exception of one property in Riverside. I believe that will pretty generally be the case. Unless we intervene and say there are other places in Jericho where we expect to have substantial housing. And I think I really liked, Chris's list. If you look at right here, this is West Bolton right here, which is twice as big as Jericho Center, denser, younger, more energetic, has more kids. Why wouldn't we want to have, some dense housing out here? We look at we're stuck, with Jericho sort of looking inward. Richmond's just as close as, a lot of Jericho. Route 117, we've got dense housing on the Essex side. I mean, what, 50 fourplexes kind of right there. We have dense housing on the Richmond side, 10-acre zoning on Route 117. I mean, Red Martin's dead, Don Fay's dead, Brooks Buxton's dead. We can look at 117 now. That should be an area where it's possible. You need big hunks of land to build 20, 30, 40 houses at a time. It's not going to happen in the village center. So I think you need more sections. We really need to start telling them that we're not going to be limited by these three little villages, because we can't meet our housing targets that way. On this, I thought they were calling this a growth area. So I really was going to go lot by lot and explain why.
Where is
Can you
that, Chuck?
explain where that is exactly?
This is the area just above Jericho Center. The new area, the new gold area.
Where is it on
What's
the larger
That
map?
going
Where is
out
it?
to the river.
Right there.
That's the section where the colors changing to,
Oh, the transition area?
yeah, the transition area.
So that under the B, that's Packard Road?
This is Brown
No,
Street.
under the B.
This
to
is the high school.
To the left of
Okay.
the B is Packard Road?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the new section. I thought they were calling this a growth area.
Got it. So that's where Packard and
Go
Morgan
lot by lot
intersect.
and say,
Got
If we're crying out loud, there's not going to be any growth there. So I think you need to put more sections. You said in the town plan, you'd look at West Bolton as a growth area. Oh, these are the soils.
Mhm.
So here, we got good soils out here. We've got some good soils down here. This is on a soil map. So all the good soils are the high school ball field. There's one piece of land that's open here. That's already been subdivided into 6 lots, little lots along here. This is the only big hunk of land that's owned by one person. There's all bad soils out here.
Thanks, Chuck. That was helpful.
And it goes back to Wendy's
So we can. put
point,
together
the soil
an
map,
overlay
wetlands
list
map.
and do our own
And you need to look at who owns the land. Down here along Plains Road, Lee River Road, there are some enormous lots. They're about to turn over. I mean, 90-year-old owners. What would Dominic do?
Age discrimination is still against the law.
Yes. Wait, are we? Yes.
My name is Jim Carroll, for the record. I'd like to point out the devil's in the details, and after all the years that I've been involved with this type of stuff, and doing any of this stuff quickly, always comes back and bites us. And Mr. Tatros sitting in this room, and there's been at least 2 or 3 projects that have been unable to be developed because the zoning regulations that were placed on that property outside the process in a rush has prevented, because of the width of a lot, development. So the devil's in the details, and it maybe Jericho should consider taking a pass, because when you read this stuff, there are poison pills in here that can adversely affect other things. So it looks like because Jericho is not well fit to the village center concept that appears to be a drug swallowed in Montpelier, because the way the land was developed had more to do with who owned it. And I'm going to point something out. The Rivers' property is 125 acres that's ending up in the rural zone here. It has the soils on it. I was the last person to farm that property. My cattle were all over it. I hate it. I understand that property. It is changing because of the congestion caused by roads. But the bottom line is, it's got the capacity, which was completely ignored during the wastewater study, to deal with the polluted water problem that we have in the 18 to 20 plus houses that have their wells within the effluent treatment areas in the village. So whenever we start looking at this stuff and not considering the on the ground facts, we end up making giant mistakes. So what could have been several good developments in Riverside didn't occur. And we're still fighting, as you all know, to try to get something that makes sense in there. Now we've got some other things coming in on it. So I own one of the lands that is adversely affected by these proposals. It is a taking, and it's a taking as proposed without consideration. So that's an invitation to go to court. That's not a good thing, and it doesn't accomplish the goals. When you read these categories in here, this is mumbo jumbo. You have 125 acres right adjacent to the town center on the Rivers' property, and you're proposing to make it very difficult to do anything with it because it's not in tier 2, when it could easily be in tier 2, but because it didn't get developed and we had cattle on it, this is saying, let's leave it that way. Well, the high school's here, the village is here. We've got a wetland that evolved because of beavers that weren't controlled behind the store. And when we look at the land the way it really is, it needs to be done before we start making these decisions. And 3 to 5 years, I'm 77. I don't want to be 90 yet, but this is all real stuff, and it needs to be, and it's not that hard to do it right now, but we have to talk to the people that actually own the land that's being, in effect, put into a preservation category that doesn't justify recognition of economic and community values. There's the word economics all through here. I can assure you, it's not economics for the people that own the land.
Thank you. You're at 3. Thanks very much. So,
Hello, hello.
yep, Bill would like to comment.
Yes, on one of the parcels that's encircled in yellow along Nashville Road. Yeah, thank you. It's a water face that goes under Nashville Road. It extends from the range under Nashville Road and into those fields, which are actually lower than the standing water on the north side of Nashville Road, which is the range. And then 2 enormous wetlands extend in both directions. So it really should, before you just look at that and say, oh, let's put some houses there. It's really not conducive to that, but it is tremendously valuable as a wetlands resource and a sponge.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so we should move on.
All right, housing targets. So, let's see, where are we? All right, okay. So CCRCP has developed housing targets for Jericho. So this slide, it's got lots of words and numbers on it, but it's showing the housing targets for all the municipalities in Chittenden County. Jericho has been classified as an urban rural town, primarily because we have access to some municipal services, specifically water. Yeah, it's important to note these housing targets for the region, they're based on a need and a high level assessment of areas designated for growth in each municipality. It does not take into account granular data like areas of undeveloped land or soil capacity for septic or the state of municipal infrastructure. They know that we have a need for X number of housing units, and based on a methodology that they developed to try to figure out how to allocate it evenly and equitably throughout the region, that's how these numbers came up. So I know, Wendy, you've said a couple times, where are we going to fit all of this? And I think we've had comments from the public, like, does it make sense to put X number of units in Jericho Center? There are different criteria and methodology that came up with these numbers. Here you can see in greater clarity the housing numbers that are specific to Jericho. So Jericho's current housing units were just over 2,000. The housing targets on the right show low to middle in terms of targets for new units in Jericho by 2050. So that ranges from 210 to 629. The numbers on the right are how many housing units Jericho would need to be permitted each year to meet those targets. So that'd be either 8, 17, or 25. And you can see in the middle, typically we're seeing 10 permits a year. So the low target's a little below that. The high target is more than twice that.
Those 10 permits are constructed and finished.
I don't know the answer to that.
And because these are agnostic of the kind of housing, it's just. Right, they're just saying number of,
Housing units.
So like a one-bedroom ADU is a unit,
okay.
is that correct?
I'm gonna say yes.
It looks low.
Yeah, I have looked at the numbers. I don't know if that 10 is C of O. It may be C of O's. I'm saying
Okay.
permitted, but it may be C of O's. Outside these numbers are, I'm going to say they're comparable to what the Affordable Housing Committee came up with, although the numbers, they're very different. They're similar to what the committee and the select board adopted in terms of looking at the high target. I mean, both the high target and what we've already adopted are both aggressive in terms of how many units we want to build in Jericho, putting aside the date that was established to achieve them. So I think that the numbers that we already adopted wanted to have all of these units by 2028, which is very aggressive, but you take sort of that methodology or the idea that we're just getting more housing over time. You look at CCRP's numbers and it's somewhat consistent in getting us up to that high number of 629 by 2050.
This is a good time for a question.
That's really all I've got to say for the housing targets, except that the working group was comfortable with these numbers and is recommending that we accept these numbers and support them.
Work to achieve them.
Work to achieve them, yeah.
Okay, so 2 questions. Is there any consideration for the type of housing in terms of affordability? In other words, of these target numbers, has anybody thought, 50% should be affordable, or is there not? And maybe that doesn't matter for this discussion.
I don't think they matter for this discussion. These are targets. They are intended to inspire, push municipalities to make changes to get more housing. There aren't any penalties if we don't meet them, but if everyone does their bit, we should be pulling our weight to achieve the region's housing issue.
The second question, has anybody thought about the targets relative to a map? To say, if we had 25 targeted this year, 15 are going to be in Riverside, or
I'm going to say no. Now, when CCRPC came up with these numbers, they did look at areas that were like the acreage or the land area that was designated for growth, and they factored that into how they came up with the numbers for all the municipalities, right? So that was just part of the methodology for coming up with the numbers. In terms of, do these all go in, for us, do they all go in Riverside? Do they all go in that tan area? Do we agree that it's just not feasible to put any more housing in Jericho Center? Those would be questions that we as Jericho would need to wrestle with to figure out how to achieve these numbers. That work has not been done. This is setting us a target
I mean, I think
to try to
Riverside
hit.
alone is targeting like 150 units or so. I can't remember.
I think phase one's 27.
But isn't there ultimately, there's a lot more than that though, ultimately, isn't there?
Yeah, yes. I don't know the exact number, but I know that there's 27 in the first phase.
Well, it would seem, I mean, as you said, that they're aspirational, it doesn't, but it would seem as a tool, since we're talking about that relative to this, to think where would these go? And is it realistic? And if this doesn't line up with that, then how can we make them aspire to line up?
This is the question Wendy was asking, yeah.
But theoretically, if the CCRPC map somewhat aligns with our town map, and we've done the thinking in our town plan with our town future map and our own goals for housing, right? If these are reflected and close enough to our own goals for housing, then while we don't have it all plotted out right now, we did do some of the work already that we can build on by saying, in our town plan, here's what we're going to aspire to, and here is the land, the future land use plan. So in some ways, while we don't have what we want granularly, we do have both pieces aligning conceptually.
Yes.
Is that true?
Well, my question is, have we ever been coming up with these numbers? I think a lot of the numbers that we have in the town plan came from the Affordable Housing Committee. And my question is, did anybody in this process ever compare those numbers to the zoning map?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
When we were doing that on the Affordable Housing Committee, we looked at a total goal and did not specify where it would go. But we did say out of the new housing district, one of the earlier questions, I think it was 140% to be in the affordable range. So a big chunk, but where it would be was not covered.
Well, I don't know if this is the time to do that, but it would seem if this were a goal based somewhat in reality, that it would make sense to compare a housing target with a zoning map and to say, okay, we really could get 10 units here, or we're maxed out, we can't get this ever. So
Doesn't that depend on the type of housing you build? You know, if the zoning map says you can put in a duplex or a triplex, then that's very different.
But to Chuck's point, take Jericho Center, for example, there's not, there's just the property that the fire department owns that I think could hold a lot of housing, but aside from that, there's not a lot of housing you're going to get there.
Right.
So anyway, this may not be the time for that, but it would seem.
I totally agree with you, Chris, that we need to, and it may also go back to the question of when we do get beyond the 3 centers through the municipal planning that we're using and start looking into the whole of the town. I think Chuck asked the question, is like we are being through, because of the statewide aspirations and goals and standards, we are being tied to these 3 centers for the purposes of meeting those goals. But however, and we have the opportunity as the planning commission, as we continue down the path of zoning, to say, yeah, that those align with what we said in the town plan. And it also aligns with the town plan to encourage development in another area. We could.
Yeah. I think it can inspire though, or require actually like us to be more creative where, well, I have a whole bunch of thoughts. So first of all, I think true, ideally, it would be better to have the targets, do the map, make sure, and do the opposite order. I think our group is functioning at a level of questioning and morality, to be honest, at a much higher level than the typical small town in Vermont. And I think what the regional planning commissions are trying to do is give everyone the ability to think about things in terms of goals. Like it comes naturally to all of us here, like we've been doing this for a long time, our professional lives, we do it. And so it doesn't bother me that it's a little out of order. In fact, I think it could help you say, earlier we were like, oh no, we don't want these, you know, if they're green, then they can't be housing. But now you're talking about like, well, what kind of housing? If anything, having a higher target can help you say, you know, rural, I need to allocate land in a rural area that's green for more houses. So my zoning should not be encouraging big houses on big lots in those conservation areas. The way I can get both is by encouraging smaller houses closer together with maybe shared septic that's not pumped in from some big town system somewhere. It sort of says, you know what? These are really hard goals. We have to think outside the box. We can't make it win-lose. I win if I'm building housing. I'm losing if I'm doing conservation. I need to say, like, how can I take this map and all these soils and build these houses? And if that means they have to be smaller, if that means we need to be better technology for septic, we need to, you know, what, I don't know, you know, I don't have all the answers, and then it wouldn't be such a hard problem to solve. But the reason why it's such a hard problem to solve is because everybody's stuck in this old paradigm of lot sizes and houses and my house and your house. And I think our planning commission has the talent to be able to take these two things that seem very irreconcilable and say, we're going to figure this out. And the regional planning commission is trying to give that kind of a tool to all the planning commissions to help them start to think outside the box. Blah, blah, blah.
No, I think that's very well said. What I want to aspire to is to have the bigger picture in our mind as we make individual zoning decisions, so that as we move ahead incrementally, we have
Yes.
the big picture, so that we're not going in the direction we don't want to end up in.
Right. So you know how Heidi's always saying, like, well, what's our goal? Let's go back and revisit our goal. Why are we doing this? Now, when we're doing our ongoing work, we're going to be like, well, we had the housing resolution. This gives that more. And it also means we can argue for more support, more money, more investment, more public-private partnerships. We're not going to be doing this all alone because they're trying to get everybody on the same train. So all of our changes are going to be like, where are we going to put these houses? That to me is like the work of the next couple of years or sooner.
I actually like that there's the additional lever of the CCRPC and not just our resolution. I think having that additive is helpful.
So I'm hearing thumbs up on working group's recommendation to go with these, and that really cool. Any other? Okay. So I would suggest that we already had public comment on the future land use map to invite if there are specific comments on the 1B designation and the public and the housing targets.
You take that?
Yes,
Greg Pedro for the record. So. So. The state has put in a 10-acre rule. And. In the rule, the way we understand it, my engineer understands it. That it should be based on disturbance, not acres. Because if you read that thing, it says you can't disturb more than 10 acres. Well, apparently other folks in the state don't think that way. So we're trying to figure out how to move ahead. We had our application in. We pulled it because they were gonna deny it, and that sets up a whole another deal. So we've written letters to the senators saying that because there is a 1-acre rule, that if you can own 100 acres, and if you want to build on 1 acre, you can, because it's a 1-acre disturbance. And we feel that at the phase 1 of this project is 6.5 acres, and it should be exempt. So I kind of want you guys to think about that. I don't know what it's going to do for what we've seen tonight, probably nothing. But, you know, it's probably going to set things back a little bit. I'm not real excited about going through an Act 250 because I've been through them before, and I'd just soon be dragged behind your car going home tonight, honestly. It's just really hard project. I mean, I may have to, but so if you know legislators and, you know, you can write a letter, I think as long as the disturbance is less than 10 acres, it doesn't matter if you have 10 or you have 50. That's the way I see it. So either that or we subdivide off 5 acres somehow. I don't know. It's been a long process, and you guys have done all you can do to get this thing moving, but now we're up against that. So just a little just updating you. I think a lot of what you've done here is great work. I do like this map with the roads on it, so now I know where the heck I am, you know. It's a little hard sometimes when you're looking at that and there's no road. I'm like, well, where the hell am I? So, but I think you're doing good work, and I think Chris had a burr on his saddle when he figured out that the other county planning commission's kind of taken over a little bit, and I was feeling the same way, to be honest with you. But I think as the night went on, it seems a little bit better than it did in the very beginning. So, but anyway,
What can we do to help you get that approved?
I think.
Aside from calling our state representatives.
So we wrote a letter. I probably should have brought it with me, but we're to the senators that are on the housing committee or whatever it is. And we're gonna see how that takes. I've been working with a person in the governor's offices, and he thinks the same as we do. But there's 4 or 5 words in there, and I'll try to get, maybe send it to Chris, and that need to be changed so that it's areas of disturbance, not the piece of land. So, you know, we'll see how that shakes out. I'm hoping I get to testify down there when they get going on it. Our senator, who I know well up in Lamoille County, is Richie Westman, who's been there forever. I don't know how many years, but he's going to help me try to work through this a little bit. And I don't really know your guys or people, senators down here too much, but Keisha Ram we know well. But so we'll just keep working it and see what happens, and maybe we can get something moved around.
What is the timeline on the 1B process?
It will get adopted. Well, the intent is that it gets adopted by the time that the temporary exemptions expire.
Are we,
Did that make sense to everyone, what I just said? Okay.
does the town of Jericho have control over that schedule?
We need to make our recommendation to CCRPC by the end of June.
But could we do it sooner? Would that benefit us?
I don't think it will benefit us because right now the temporary exemptions are in place. The temporary exemptions that are triggering this 10-acre thing are
So
currently in
so-
place.
Saying,
Until 2026.
The problem
Right.
in Riverside isn't gonna be better by the 1B designation. The problem that Greg Taco is having now.
The problem that Greg Tatro is having now will get worse if we don't have if we don't do the 1B designation, the Act 250 exemption that he is arguing for goes away as an option.
No, I know, but
Okay,
the 1B doesn't, if 1B went into effect tomorrow, that wouldn't help Greg.
correct, because he is operating under the same exemptions that are temporary.
Okay.
I'll keep pushing
so
along.
in the village center, his first phase is less than 50 units. However, the piece of property is 10 acres or
Is
more.
15.
Yeah,
Right.
15.
So you have to meet all those criteria. But what he's saying is he's not developing the whole thing, he's just developing it.
Just to make a comment, just think, that is an existing industrial site. It's been disturbed for 75 years. And you're arguing with some bureaucrat somewhere who's probably never looked at the property. But all the time I've been here, which.
Thank you, but we
Yeah, that's all.
it's 10 after 9, so. we
Yeah,
have
it's
to
getting
move on.
late.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll keep you up to date on where I'm
Please
at.
do.
Thank you.
So, I think I'm just going to call a public comment now, since I think everyone had a chance to speak. And turn it back over to Chris, and everyone knows that they can always reach out with additional comments after the meeting to either Chris or Susan, and so their voices will be heard, even if it's not right now.
Great, I will try and go quickly here. So just for next steps, so I've already covered this a little bit, but the next meeting, May 20th, we will be having the BMG hearing on the May 20th. We'll also be having our meeting with CCRPC to go over what will refine what we've discussed, share that with them, get their feedback on that. I know one of the things that they really want to hear from us is that we want to go for that tier 1B designation, and that seemed to be the easiest discussion we had tonight. So, great. That's all for next steps.
Quick question.
Yep.
What's CCRP? I do not good on acronyms.
It's the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. So
Okay.
we're the planning commission for Jericho, and Chittenden County has its own planning
Okay.
commission. It's a mouthful. Sorry.
So we say CCRPC really fast.
Well, I've been sitting here wondering who they is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
To they.
Right.
Yeah. Great, town planner report. BMG zoning amendments, May 20th public hearing has been warned. Everything is all set for that. I still have to finish up the public comment summary and get that posted. That's the one last piece on that. And then just something else, it just popped up. I thought this was interesting. So Vermont Homes for All, I don't know if anyone else has seen this, but the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, they are right now have an RFP out for a consultant team that is going to put together pre-permitted plans for ADUs and missing building housing. Oh, are you?
I'm not, but.
You should.
Yeah.
That's-
So once they'll be like in the public domain, they'll just make permitting a lot easier. I know the comment always comes up about how difficult it is or challenging it will be for us to meet all of our housing goals in our village centers. Yes, this is a piece that, will make it easier. It's not going to solve the problem, but it would make it easier. If you know anyone who wants to submit a proposal, their proposals are due June 20th to put a bid to develop those pre-approved plan permits for the state. So,
Does anyone have any liaison reports to give tonight?
No, but I'm turning over the JCBC to Eric.
Okay.
oh,
Okay.
I knew that, and I meant to
Yep.
change that. Yeah.
Then I would,
No, it
I wouldn't do it.
I would do it.
I was just gonna say that we're supposed to be meeting with Eric Johnson this week. I think tomorrow, is that still happening? Thursday, because we are starting to plan the next joint select board planning commission meeting.
We is me, Susan,
And-
Paula, and Eric.
Yes, so if anybody has thoughts or ideas about that, you can send them to us.
So we are, next meeting is May 20th. And Chris already went over what's gonna be happening then, so do I have a motion to adjourn? Eric, motion to adjourn, and I have a second?
Second.
Wendy seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
Hmm.
thank you.